Hey everybody, welcome back to Between the 20s. We are happy to have you back. 2 videos, 2 weeks. We are back on the trend. It is official. Despite all being very busy, we are making the time out of our schedules to bring you yet another podcast. We hope you enjoy it. We're here having fun, filming it. Elaire, Bryce, how are you guys doing today?
I'm good, Mike. I'm good. Great to be here after a pretty long week at work, but nothing like a late Friday night, early Saturday morning pod.
This is true. We are basically just got into Saturday, 3-day weekend for some of us out there. Big ups for the 3-day weekend. Very exciting. Bryce, how are you spending your 3-day weekend? Any good plans? I mean, we're all here in this pandemic. I have my plans. It's exciting when I leave my room these days, so that's always a good start. But how about for you? You're venturing out of your bedroom?
Well, out of my bedroom is a stretch, but I will be with some family this weekend, which will be nice to see some people again. You know, holiday weekend. Got to spend it with the people that you like.
Absolutely. It's good that you still like your family.
It's because he doesn't live at home all the time. That's why. He's halfway down the East Coast most of the time.
This is true. Anyway, we are here breaking down the fantasy season. We are 3 avid fantasy football players. We all are actually in the same league, and I have to say this year, one of us made the playoffs. Guys, you want to kind of break down who the best fantasy player of the 3 of us was this year in our league?
You got it.
In our league, you were a wild card, and I lost my first 2-round picks to injuries in week 1.
What I'm hearing, folks, is a lot of excuses. I picked a breakout candidate. I had a very solid bench and the second most points in the league. I would had a phenomenal team. I'm going to mention one of those guys, actually our boom pick. But before we get to that, I kind of pulled the curtain on what we're going to be doing today. So sorry about that. But we are going to break down one boom and one bust from our fantasy, from just in general the fantasy season this year. There's one caveat where the bust cannot be an injured player. So a player who missed substantial time due to injury.
No Christian McCaffrey's on this list.
Bryce can tell you a lot about those players, as he just mentioned.
Kenny Galladay's another.
It's true, yes. Kenny Galladay was a second-round pick. But that's kind of the trend that we're trying to go with. Just trying to think through what we could have done differently potentially this fantasy season when we were heading into our drafts. Obviously, there is some bad luck element as injuries come into play. And also, loss of playing time, it could definitely be brought up here. But it's hard to predict before the season starts sometimes. Other times, you just got to do your research. So with that, we're going to start with our busts. Bryce, we'll start with you. We start with Elaire a lot, just because alphabetically he's first. But we'll start.
Not just alphabetically first.
Alphabetically by last name, true. Also by last name, yeah. Bryce, get it started. Who is your bust this year?
Yeah, so my bust is actually a bit of an interesting take on the word bust, and mine's going to be Ezekiel Elliott. He still finished as RB10, so still within that RB1 range, but not even close to where we thought he was going to end up when we drafted him. He, in our pre-draft video, was our consensus 3rd overall pick. Now, if I knew that guys like Dalvin Cook and Alvin Kamara would have better years, obviously I would take them over Ezekiel Elliott. So seeing a guy that I was taking top 3, or actually for me, I think I had him ranked 4th, but consensus 3 or 4, falling to RB10, which actually would fall out of the first round entirely. That for me is definitely a bust. Would have been a guy in a rock. He would have been a rock in your lineup every week. And after the Dak Prescott injury, he just wasn't. So not totally in his control, obviously, but he was particularly efficient. He's never really been that efficient, but didn't have the goal line touches that he usually has. Zeke is my bust solely because, still an RB1, really running back anyone that played enough games, finished top 24, but still not really close to where we thought he was going to be this year.
Yeah, I think I have 2 things to bring up sort of in response to that. First of all, there were some shrewd individuals out there, some of them featured on this Zoom call, who did choose other running backs over Ezekiel Elliott, other than Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey were the consensus number 1, number 2 picks. Like Dalvin Cook, for example, who I took with that 3rd overall pick. Just scouting that fantasy talent out there, folks. So just when I'm speaking today, tune in a little extra. Just, really get zoned in.
Still passing Alvin Kamara in full PPR though.
We can move on from that. He also had a game with 6 touchdowns, which inflated his scoring, I want to say.
He was
He
all
killed
day
my
long.
fantasy team. Yeah.
And you guys probably wouldn't have to worry about, those playoffs usually. Amir, who is your bust this year?
My bust is a big bust. I'm talking Mark Ingram, running back for the Baltimore Ravens. This guy, you always draft him kind of as an RB2 flex guy. You can always put him in your lineup, and he'll get the guaranteed touches. That's Mike's go-to guaranteed
Love the
touches
guaranteed
guy.
touches.
Mike would admit Mike's normally a huge Mark Ingram guy. This is a guy that was drafted 4th, 5th, 6th round. His ADP was around 45, and he ended up as the running back 75 in half PPR. Sure, he missed a couple games. He was in the COVID protocols for a bit, but even when he was on the field, this guy was just not effective. J.K. Dobbins looked much better than him. Even Gus Edwards looked much better than him. And Lavar Jackson looked much better than him. So you had 3 guys that could run the ball better than Mark Ingram on his own team, which that's never a good sign for fantasy. So he had a rough year, and anyone that drafted him probably had a rough year as well. So you put in a lot of draft capital, and you did not get any return from Mark Ingram.
Yeah, I definitely see your point there. I also think what I also want to say in response to Bryce before was sometimes you just have kind of a player not necessarily directly impacted by injury, but Dak Prescott obviously affected Ezekiel Elliott. But if you're looking back at Mark Ingram, do you view now those 2 running backs behind him as a threat, or do you think more about them before the season starts?
Are you talking about moving into next year?
No, moving into this year. I'm trying to even remember. Were they on our radar?
J.K. Dobbins was, right? Because he was a 3rd round pick, I think, for Baltimore. We knew he was going to get touches. We knew he was going to be worked in later in the season, a lot like what the Lions were doing with DeAndre Swift, who obviously boomed a little bit more because he was the guy. But Dobbins was definitely on our radars. Gus the Bus was not, at least for me. He was a guy that he was a waiver pickup a couple years ago and was massive for 2 or 3 weeks, but he wasn't really a threat. And seeing him overtake Mark Ingram is definitely something to be wary of for Mark Ingram moving forward.
And I think the Dobbins analysis there is really interesting because Amir Bryce will tell you, and I'll mention it in my boom segment a little bit later. Who should you target late in fantasy drafts, guys?
Anyone with a suit in their picture.
Exactly.
AKA rookies.
Yes, exactly. Because ideally what you're trying to do in the late rounds, folks, for those of you a little statistically oriented here, you're looking for a high volatility pick, right? You're not looking for guaranteed touches late in the draft. What you're looking for is that guy who has the potential to boom, because the odds are they're probably either on the back of your bench or in the waiver wire like 2 weeks later, because they don't pan out for you, or you haven't needed another position, so you drop them. So you're trying to draft somebody with a high spike, and I think that's what you saw from J.K. Dobbins this year. Granted, it wasn't at this extreme level, sort of, but he did break out because there's kind of that uncertainty heading into the season. And what is this rookie's role going to be? Veterans, where they're going to be in their teams, but it's the rookie where you can kind of, take advantage of that uncertainty. And that's why I do like selecting rookies later in the draft. But my bust is going to be a little bit of a personal bust too. It was Lavar Jackson in my fantasy draft. And he was not necessarily a bust, I'd say, from a point standpoint, but just kind of a draft mindset point. Where he was like sort of a 3rd round, 4th round pick heading into or at least that was kind of his ADP. And the way I kind of view that ADP is if somebody's going to take a shot at an early quarter, shot at one of 2 people, and that's either Patrick Mahomes or Lavar Jackson. And if the discrepancy between those 2 was very large. I mean, Patrick Mahomes finished as the quarterback 1, and Lavar Jackson finished as the quarterback 10. And that's just, it's really disheartening to kind of use a 3rd round pick on somebody who kind of flounders in such a light. And granted, he did have a very good second half of the season, and he picked it up a little bit. But you're looking for more than a solid floor running back. Quarterback running back that was making Bryce very happy. I called Lavar Jackson a running back by accident. But yes, you're looking for sort of more than a high floor quarterback with your 3rd overall draft pick. And then I'm going to also slide in here a little bit more of a traditional bust, Clyde Edwards-Elaire. But Elaire sort of also had the situation around him kind of evolve as the season went on. Le'Veon Bell came in, and I think just in general, that Chiefs offense, you never know exactly what they're going to look to hand the ball to or to throw the ball to, which is basically handing in a long fashion for Patrick Mahomes because he's just automatic. But what do you two think about those busts?
Yeah, so I drafted Clyde Edwards-Helaire pretty high. I drafted him at 7. I thought that he was going to hit the ground running, no pun intended. I thought after his year at LSU, he's kind of a dual threat guy. He could catch the ball and run the ball. And he had a pretty solid start to the season. But then he just never really got the goal line work for the team. He never really got the third down work. He never kind of took the role by himself. And then once, like you said, Le'Veon Bell came in, it was kind of his ceiling was capped by a lot of the decisions that Andy Reid and the Chiefs offense made.
Yeah, I think a lot of the hype around Clyde Edwards-Helaire going in was just he had shades of Kareem Hunt, right? When Kareem Hunt was a rookie, 3rd round pick, not a 1st round pick, but he still led the league in rushing with the Chiefs. And Andy Reid has always heavily relied on his running backs. But I think what everyone forgot to realize is that this is a different Chiefs team. When Kareem Hunt was a rookie, I believe 2017, if I'm not mistaken, Alex Smith was the starting quarterback. That is a vastly different team from the team Kansas City put on the field this year, last year, for the next 15 years to come with Patrick Mahomes. So obviously, even if Andy Reid still uses the running backs, it's not going to be that same kind of volume. It's not going to be the same kind of usage just by the nature of having the best quarterback in football at the moment under center.
And I think in general, this is also a point that I love to make to these two. The end of the 1st round is a tough spot to draft. Because I mean, it's hard to make a mistake in the first 5 picks. Like obviously, if you had Christian McCaffrey or Saquon Barkley, you didn't have a great season, but you knew that you were making the right pick there. There is just it's kind of a crapshoot there at the end of that 1st round because you could get someone who's like a solid top 5 running back like Aaron Jones, or you could wind up with kind of that CEH just kind of annoying, never managed to get there to that potential. Which is always just very frustrating. And then it makes it difficult to kind of win week in and week out. But enough of the sad small harp here. Let's get on to bigger and better things. We're going from like a small harp to the power of Billy Joel's piano, which Bryce loves. Or one of the guitar solos that Bryce likes a lot from any number of 80s hard rock, borderline metal bands. Borderline metal, yes, there's a lot of very loud. Okay, now that we've each addressed a bust, it's time to move on to bigger, brighter pastures. We're going to talk about some of our fantasy booms from this season. With that, we're going to switch up the order. I know we started with Bryce last time. Amer, who was your fantasy boom this year?
My fantasy boom was...
Your fantasy boom.
Boom was an explosion, absolute breakout from a guy that I'm sure no one had heard about before maybe week 1 or week 2 of this year, and that's James Robinson, running back for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't know what to tell you. Undrafted in the NFL. Obviously undrafted in your fantasy league. But this guy ended up as the running back 4. Only 3 guys. That means only 3 guys, only 3 running backs scored more points this season than James Robinson. This guy was elite. His workload was awesome. And this is from a guy that, I mean, no one saw this coming. We're looking at a Jaguars team that was bad this year, obviously 1-15, locked up that number 1 pick. And just a team that no one really knew what the offense was going to look like. No one knew what the running back situation was going to look like once Leonard Fournette got cut in the offseason. And so this guy just took the opportunity and he made the most of it. He did an awesome job. It was great to see. It's a great story, undrafted guy, rushing for 1,000 yards and having such a great season. Obviously, for me, this is an easy choice. My boom of the fantasy year was definitely James Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue against that. And I also think that, a lot of times you'll see like any receiver on the Chiefs really come off the board and somebody going, oh, I just want a piece of that offense. But sometimes you can find, that cornerstone on a bad team. Keep with the Jaguars trend, Maurice Jones-Drew, who I still follow on Twitter for some reason. He was kind of that player down there. Even though the team wasn't very good, he was getting consistent touches and a solid fantasy performance. And a lot of times, because they're relying so much on that one person and kind of game planning around them, they are going to be actually quite consistent as opposed to kind of a big boom bust play as you might see on the Chiefs offense. But with that, Bryce, who is your boom this year?
Yeah, I don't know how you can talk about 2020 football, especially fantasy football, without talking about Stefan Diggs. I mean, this guy, all he needed was an opportunity, and he finally got it. Buffalo shipped out a first-round pick to get him, worth every penny that they traded away. They gave Josh Allen a weapon. Stefan Diggs made Josh Allen better. He really did, as did Brian Dable. But this guy was a target machine. I think he had more double-digit targets than I can count. He was just on fire. The guy hit another level, especially this back half of the season. He was putting up 120, 130 yards every game, it seemed like. He became a volume receiver after being squandered, I would say, in Minnesota, getting 4 to 5 targets a game. It's not the way that he should have been played, and Buffalo gave him that opportunity. Stefan Diggs, I mean, he was being drafted 5th, 6th round, so we're looking at him more as a low-end wide receiver 2, probably more of a flex play. Top 5 wide receiver in all formats. He had a spectacular season. Bills are still in the hunt now for the Super Bowl. They are, as if you watched the last video, they're actually my Super Bowl pick. He had an unbelievable season, and he's someone that I will absolutely, and I think everyone will absolutely be targeting in next year's draft.
I know who hasn't watched that last video there, Bryce, so I'm sure everybody knows who your Super Bowl pick is. But the Stefan Diggs trade opened a bit of a wide receiver position up there in Minnesota. And that the player who filled that position is
with the same
boom
pick that they got, actually, from the
yes,
Bills.
Exactly. Talk about an efficient transaction. Well, the Stefan Diggs trade and pick resulted in my boom pick, Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson was a late single digit, we're talking 8th, 9th, or maybe even early double digit 10th, 11th round pick. I told you guys before, late rounds, what am I looking for? The guys in the suits on their ESPN pictures, because that means you get that high volatility. And you know who kind of came out on that high end of the bell curve? That's my man, Justin Jefferson. You love to see sort of that 1 sigma, 2 sigma performance from what was expected, and that's exactly what you got. Justin Jefferson finished as a top 10 wide receiver 8 in the PPR league that we all play in, just sort of standard PPR ESPN settings. It was just phenomenal to have him on your team, and part of it was just you saw him get better throughout the season. It was just exciting because he had a big week early on, sort of, and it just kind of emerged as, wow, this guy who I picked late can potentially, sort of filter into my starting lineup as a flex play, a wide receiver too. And that's what happened as the season went on. You got more and more confident playing him. There's just one complaint I have about him, or not about him as much, about the team. My man, Adam Thielen. That guy just snags those red zone targets, and it's very frustrating. Especially for me, I had Dalvin Cook as well. So basically, anytime Adam Thielen scored, he was taking away 6 points from me in some form or fashion. But with that aside, Justin Jefferson was just absolutely phenomenal this year and paid huge dividends for fantasy owners and people who kind of took that moderate risk. I mean, not even a risk, just a kind of a late flyer on him. It's always very exciting to see those pay off. And honestly, it was one of the first times where I kind of really got that experience where I took somebody kind of late and watched them blossom right before my eyes. So it was very exciting. You have any comments on Justin Jefferson or our booms and busts, guys?
Just that Justin Jefferson, I want to say how remarkable it is that the Vikings still won this trade. Stefan Diggs was unbelievable. They got a guy just as good for half the money. Kudos to the Vikings.
This is true. And also younger, kind of more of a career to go with there. It's very, very exciting, and always got to love sort of trades that can work out for both teams. You see a lot of that these days, other than when Bill O'Brien's at the helm. That never really works out well. But otherwise, a lot of these organizations are getting very analytical, and you see a lot of trades where, it's true, this exchange of goods and this open marketplace can kind of make two teams better, if that's even, obviously economics has proven that it's possible. So here we are. And now, after that very boring lecture on economics from yours truly, I think it's time to call it a night, or a good morning at this point. As always, check us out on this channel. We have a lot of great content from when we could all be together, although probably somewhat stale. It really never gets boring to watch the three of us, or really me for 70% of the time, in a blooper video, because I'm the one making most of our mistakes. With that, I hope you enjoyed watching, and we'll be with you very soon, breaking down potentially the end of the NFL playoffs, or kind of anything from the sports world. I know Bryce is very excited for the hockey season, as you can tell by his attire. With that, we hope you're doing well, and we hope you'll tune in next time on Between the Twins.